We'll keep talking about the draft right now with Ricky O'Donnell. You can find him on Twitter at SBN_Ricky. You can read his draft coverage last night from his Twitter page. What's going on, Ricky?
What's going on?
I thought that was a pretty interesting draft. I actually thought it lived up to the hype, minus maybe not as many trades as we had speculated. But when the draft is flat, maybe teams aren't as motivated to make moves on what's going to ultimately result in a gamble anyways.
Yeah, I agree. I was honestly expecting a lot of crazy trades after what happened the day before with Mikal Bridges going to the Knicks, the Nets and the Rockets making that weird pick trade. So I was expecting it to be, an action-packed draft. Instead, mostly went according to plan, but a few big surprises. Timberwolves trading into the top 10 to get Rob Dillingham, I thought was just totally unforeseen move, and one that's really interesting on numerous levels. Zach Edey going to the Grizzlies, I think, is a headline, some headline news from the day. He's a fascinating fit there. And, yeah, I think in general it was a pretty interesting draft. And, it'll be cool to see how the second round plays out today.
We saw in Utah Rob Dillingham kind of always mocked right around where the Jazz are, kind of a position of need. I mean, the Jazz just need help everywhere they can go. And we know the upside of Dillingham as a scorer and what could result there. I wasn't a huge Rob Dillingham fan. I thought it took a really specific fit for him, and I actually think the Timberwolves might be a perfect fit as far as like just kind of the strangeness of what his story is and where he was going to fit. A team that doesn't need him to be a superstar, but can just really utilize his ability to space the floor, make some plays off the dribble, and he can do it as the third option for them as opposed to the first option for other lottery teams. I thought that was actually pretty smart, though they paid a pretty heavy price to do it.
Yeah, they paid a huge price. Well, was it an unprotected 2031 pick and then a pick swap in 2030? So, I mean, I immediately started thinking, how long does Ant's contract go? Like, if he leaves, that could be a very high pick, during Wembanyama's prime years for the Spurs, really. But honestly, I love it for the Timberwolves because how many times last year did we see their offense just sort of bogged down in the half court, especially late in games? Rob Dillingham, to me, is the most electric playmaker in this draft class. Just such a deadly shooter, whether he's on or off the ball, like such a good relocation shooter, has a good feel for just like finding the cracks in the defense and, can shoot off movement, plenty of different, like he has a lot of shooting versatility, I think. So they needed a young point guard there. Conley is old and on the last legs of his career. So Dillingham is like, he's just so small, like 165 pounds. He's going to be the lightest guy in the NBA next season, probably. So what better to put around him than Rudy Gobert, than Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards in the backcourt? So I love it. I think, it's a bold move by the Timberwolves for sure. It's borderline, maybe a little reckless, but this is their window. You need a cost control guy. You need a point guard. You need some shooting and some playmaking. So I really like the vision of that trade for Minnesota.
And one of the weird things, I don't want to get too bogged down. I want to get into what the Jazz did and some of the other moving pieces. But in the new CBA, there is this rule basically where if you're over the tax apron, the second tax apron, your pick 7 years out can no longer be traded. And if you do it twice within a 4-year period, your pick drops to number 30 and it gets frozen there. Like you don't get to pick higher than that. I wonder if Minnesota just said, well, 2031, that pick's probably going to be number 30 for us, or we're just not going to be able to trade it in the future. So if we're going to make a move to go all in right now, let's just do it because that pick may not have A, be tradable, or B, will be 30 regardless of where we are because of what their tax punishments they're going to pay in the next couple of years are looking like.
Yeah, that's a good call. I didn't even consider that. I think we're still sort of learning about how the CBA is going to be limiting for teams going forward. That could be a really good example of it. So, still, you would think if it pick swapped, it wouldn't be frozen, though, right? Like even if they did.
Right. It unfreezes if it's swapped, I guess. And yeah, you're right. I think we're still going to have to see how all this plays out. And maybe there were some really ambitious teams last night who found a loophole in that process before the NBA's really realized it.
Yeah. So, we'll see how it plays out. But, I like the boldness of it, if nothing else. So good on the Timberwolves for that, actually trying to win.
All right, Ricky, I know you were in Chicago and you've followed the Bulls. You've written a lot about the Bulls. So I'm sure you were looking at a lot of the same prospects where the Jazz were. The Bulls picked at 11. The Jazz picked at 10. The Jazz walk away with Cody Williams. What were your thoughts on Cody entering the draft and then what the Jazz did?
Wasn't one of my favorite players in this draft, but if you want to tell me that 5 years from now, Cody Williams will return top 5 value in this class, I would believe it for sure. I think that he has a long way to go, and he's kind of a pretty raw prospect right now. But that also fits Utah's timeline. I don't think the Jazz are trying to make some big playoff push in the Western Conference this year. They are probably eyeing that loaded 2025 draft class like everyone else. So in that sense, I can see what was appealing to them about Cody Williams. The thing that stands out to me is he just has so much trouble playing through contact right now. He's 178 pounds. Obviously, he's the younger brother of Jalen Williams. You look at Jalen, and he's just blown up. He runs over guys. He's so much stronger now than he was a couple of years ago at Santa Clara. I mean, if that can happen to Cody Williams, that would be a huge boon for his game because when he walks into the gym, he's got a lot of traits that you look for in a modern NBA small forward. Very rangy, good in the open floor, great size with a 7'1" wingspan, hit his threes on low volume. I do sort of wonder, like, is his handle going to be good enough in the half court to actually have any offensive utility in the early part of his career? And I also wonder, like, is he going to be confident enough to shoot when he gets those opportunities because he turned down a lot of shots at Colorado. But as a long-term play, sure, I like Cody Williams. I think 10 is perfectly fine value. And, the Jazz are still playing the long game, and I think that that's an important thing to remember in making this pick.
They then landed Isaiah Collier at number 29. That's quite a bit lower than a lot of people projected, though. I don't think it was out of the question that he was going to go in the 20s. And once you get to that point, a drop of 6 or 7 picks really isn't that wild. But what were your thoughts on Isaiah Collier, a guy who, going into the season, if there was no one and done, might have been the number 1 overall pick?
I love Collier. I had him 7th on my board. I think I had Cody Williams 14th. So incredible value to get Collier at number 29. I just wonder what the NBA is thinking. I guess, you wonder, can he play next to another primary? Like, he kind of has to be in a role where he's the engine of the offense. That's a very high bar to clear in the NBA. But honestly, I think he's got a chance to do it. He's so strong, so shifty, and so fast as a lead ball handler. I think that the situation at USC last year was just really terrible for him. It felt like he was playing in a shoebox. They had no lob threats. They had no shooting. And it led to a lot of turnovers for him at the early part of the year. I talked to him at the Combine, and I asked him about that. And he said, the one thing I learned quickly at USC is that sometimes you just got to make the easy play. Like, you can't be going for, like, the ambitious play. Well, maybe it's a charitable excuse, but I think just no one else at USC was on Collier's level. And he does have, like, the physical ability to be that lead engine type. So, yeah, he's got some low-hanging fruit in his game. I think he's going to need to, at minimum, become a good free throw shooter because he gets to the foul line like crazy, but he's a terrible free throw shooter, like 67%. I think he's going to need to develop, at minimum, a pretty good pull-up mid-range game. Obviously, the three-point shot needs to be worked on too. But, yeah, I think in a draft class that was weak, that didn't have a lot of on-ball creation bets, Collier deserved to be a lottery pick just for the chance he had at being one of those guys who can be the engine of your offense. To get him at 29, I thought was, arguably the best pick in the draft by the Jazz.
What else stood out in the draft for you? What surprised you? What did you like? What didn't you like?
Yeah, I thought Edey to Memphis was really interesting. Like, I covered the Final Four. I was around Edey. To me, I had him more ranked around 20, but at 9, I think that he just fits exactly what Memphis lost with Steven Adams. Like, how good was Adams in a vacuum? It could be debated, but he was certainly, like, very vital for that team with his offensive rebounding, with his screen setting, his interior scoring. And Edey does all of that with, like, way better interior touch. So, will he be able to defend? I don't know, but it makes sense to put a rangy big man like Jaren Jackson next to him, I think, to cover up for some of his mistakes. I thought that was a fascinating move, and I'm going to be really excited to watch Edey in the NBA just because we haven't really seen someone like that in this era, 7'4", 300 pounds. Beyond that, I thought Devin Carter going to the Kings was pretty interesting. He was someone who I thought would have been a good fit for any team, basically starting at 8 and then to the rest of the lottery. I just think he's got a really high floor and probably more upside than people realize. Just because of the way his offensive game developed with his three-point shot last year. I think he's going to be immediately better than Davion Mitchell, who's somewhat of a similar player the Kings drafted a few years ago out of Baylor in the first round. I just think Carter's like a better version of that, and it'll be fun to see him play next to De'Aaron Fox, next to Malik Monk. Yeah, and I think Bazelis to the Bulls is interesting too, just to get like a rangy forward who I think definitely needs to bulk up and definitely needs to work on his three-point shot. But if he can do that, you can sort of see the vision of him being the kind of versatile perimeter forward that every team wants. So interesting draft, and should be a fun day two coming up.
Yeah, definitely eye of the beholder draft, and a guy who kind of seemed like he had been slipping and hadn't generated a ton of buzz in the pre-draft process was Dylan Jones locally here out of Weber State. And then OKC gives up a borderline King's ransom, 5 second-round picks to move up and get that Knicks pick and take Dylan Jones. What were your thoughts on A, that fit, and B, Dylan Jones as a player?
My first thought is that how did the Bulls not get any picks with the Caruso for Josh Giddey swap? Is they're just giving out 5 picks?
Right.
I'm like, did you even ask for any, Arturas? Like, what are you doing? This guy's completely delusional, but I'll get off my Bulls rant soapbox. I thought that Dylan Jones sort of fits into what the Thunder always like, which is a very high-level passer with positional length. I think Dylan Jones is like, a 7'2" wingspan or something. He's super long, obviously big frame. He's like 240 pounds. He's like a bowling ball out there who just makes really great passes. And I think, the Thunder have sort of had some success with that. With I think Kendrick Williams would sort of fit that bill. Giddey, to a certain extent, fit it. So, yeah, I thought, the Thunder paid up quite a few draft picks, but they have a ton of draft picks at their disposal. And to me, Dylan Jones is what they always like. So I wasn't too surprised that he was a player they ended up drafting.
Last week, some news came out, or rumors came out, that maybe the Jazz and Bulls were in conversations about Zach LaVine. I don't think it doesn't make sense on the Jazz end. I just think they might need assets back from Chicago to take on Zach LaVine. I mean, he just might be have negative trade value at this point. What have you heard on the Zach LaVine trade, and what is Chicago looking for other than just to get off of him?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, who knows? At this point, it didn't seem like LaVine wanted to be on the team last year, so I think that's part of the motivation towards getting off him for the Bulls. These should be the prime years of his career, 29 years old. And 2 years ago, I thought he earned his money. Like, even if he's not going to be, the best player on a good team, he brings some things you need. He brings rim pressure. He brings volume three-point shooting. He's a very talented offensive player. So, if I were the Bulls, I definitely wouldn't attach assets to get rid of him. Like, to me, that's crazy. And even a potential trade with Utah, it's like, all right, what are you getting back? John Collins and Jordan Clarkson or something like that? Like, even that would be, like, pretty bad value for the Bulls. From Utah's perspective, I find it somewhat similar to the Collins trade that they did last year, where Danny Ainge was just like, well, John Collins, he's pretty good. Like, we would probably rehab his value and then flip him for something. Well, if you end up flipping him for LaVine, you would do the same thing with LaVine and say, well, LaVine could have a real market if he ends up having a good season and as, more players sign even bigger contracts than the one he has in ensuing free agency periods. So I could see that sort of being Utah's long-term plan with LaVine is like, this guy probably isn't going to ruin our tank next year. He's better than John Collins, so we'll flip Collins for him, and then we will try to rehab LaVine's value and eventually flip him. So I just sort of view it as more of like a long-term asset game from Ainge's perspective if the Jazz were to do that. But, yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation for the Bulls. I think that they're definitely going down a rebuilding path right now, which is good. I don't expect DeRozan to be on the team next year. So at that point, I think you could sort of bring LaVine back at low risk. And you say, his value can't get any lower. We're not going to freak out and, attach draft picks just to get rid of this guy. So maybe, if he ends up having another 27-point per game season where he's shooting 40% from three on high volume, maybe then develops a real market for him as the contract gets less and less in terms of years.
All right. This question's just for me. I'm a White Sox fan. I know you're a Chicago guy. Is 2005 just the only fun I'm ever going to have with Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I'm a White Sox fan too, and I have to say I haven't watched a game in a long time because, by the time I'm done with work covering basketball, the White Sox are always 15 games out of the divisional lead.
Right.
So, I'm cursed to be a sports fan of two teams owned by Jerry Reinsdorf, which would be the Bulls and the White Sox, and he's just the absolute worst owner in sports, or just the one who tries the least hard and does the least with, the greatest possible opportunity, I would say. So, yeah, the White Sox are totally pathetic. I am just ignoring the team this year and not even looking at the scores for the first time this year. I'm just totally out. And, 2005 was great, but it seems like that was a fluke and will probably never happen again.
Cool. Hey, Ricky, really good stuff. Appreciate you jumping on. Enjoy day 2 of the draft. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
There he is. Ricky O'Donnell giving us a breakdown on the latest with the NBA draft and what's coming up.